Hey up everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're all well and you're looking after yourself on this Sunday. So today I'm going to be doing another part of my NRL Rivalries video. I've already done several parts so far. Hope you've watched those, check those out. If you haven't, go back and check them out. But tonight I'm going to be doing Canterbury-Bankstown against St George. So like the rivalry I did last night with Eastern Suburbs Sydney Roosters and Canterbury, it's a very competitive rivalry. It's a rivalry which has been born out of going for that premiership title and also some geographical boundaries thrown in. It's always made for a very tough, fiery match. Both sets of supporters and both sets of players don't particularly like each other, similar to the Sydney Roosters and Canterbury rivalry. But as always, what I've done with the other rivalries, I'm going to do the same for this video, which is I'm going to go into the head-to-head, the face meeting, some of the big moments, and then conclude with some other facts. So, Canterbury and St George, they go all the way back to 1935 when Canterbury were admitted into the competition. St George were admitted in 1921. Their face meeting was on May the 11th, 1935. At Earl Park in Arncliffe, and St George beat Canterbury 91 points to 6. Now, as of 2020, that's still the biggest score recorded in New South Wales Rugby League and NRL history, and it's also the biggest loss as well, so it's the biggest win and the biggest loss. So you can imagine, first time the two clubs ever meet and a game like that happens. Then Canterbury, they won their first match against St George the next year in 1936 at Belmore Oval. They won that match 13 points to 5, so they fared much better on that occasion and they got the win. The first time that the two clubs ever met in a finals match was 1942. So St George comfortably beat Canterbury in the semi-final to make the grand final. Canterbury ended up having to go the hard way around. They made the grand final and it was played in September of 1942 on a very muddy and very wet Sydney Cricket Ground pitch. But on this occasion, Canterbury ended up winning the grand final at 11 points to 9, claiming their second premiership. St George were the defending premiers that year. They got close to defending their premiership, but they just fell short. Then it wasn't until 1967 that the two clubs met each other again in a finals match. This time it was one of the biggest meetings between the two clubs when St George were going for their 12th premiership in a row and their 12th grand final in a row, and Canterbury were going for their first grand final in 20 years. The two clubs met each other at the Sydney Cricket Ground, but on this occasion Canterbury were the club responsible for ending St George's reign. They slayed the Dragons, as you could see. They beat them 12 points to 11 in the preliminary final. So for the first time in 12 years, St George went in the grand final. So it would have been big news back then. Canterbury, of course, went into the grand final and lost against South Sydney. But to beat St George and end their reign would have been a great day for the club and their supporters. Then we go forward to 1970. The two clubs meet each other again in another semi-final clash. On this occasion, St George win 12 points to 7 at the Sydney Cricket Ground, ending Canterbury's year. In 1976, the clubs met each other in another semi-final. On this occasion, Canterbury beat St George 25 points to 9 in the semi-final, ending St George's season and a chance of making up for last year's flogging in the grand final against Eastern Suburbs. In 1979, the two clubs met each other in their third grand final against each other. And on this occasion, St George run out winners 17 points to 13 at the Sydney Cricket Ground. This was St George's last premiership as a standalone entity in the competition. Then we go forward to 1983, and on this occasion Canterbury get a bit of revenge on St George in a very thrilling finals match, winning 26 points to 24, ending St George's season. Then in 1985, St George had a very dominant year on and off the field, and under the coaching of Roy Masters they won the minor premiership and reached the grand final. On the same day, all three grades of St George made the grand final, and they were up against the Canterbury side missing the likes of Terry Lamb. But in the grand final, Canterbury upset St George, winning 7 points to 6, and they claimed their second premiership in a row in that time period, as they'd beaten Parramatta the year before. Then we go forward to 1993, and Canterbury had a very good year that year, one of the favourites to take out the premiership. St George had made the grand final the year before against Brisbane, but on this occasion St George won 27 points to 12 at the Sydney Football Stadium, knocking Canterbury out of the competition. Then in 1995, St George and Canterbury played each other in the elimination final. Canterbury ended up winning that match 12 points to 8 at the Sydney Football Stadium, and then they went on that unlikely run to the grand final from 7th place and ended up winning the premiership that year. Then in 1998, the two clubs met each other in the elimination final at Canterbury Oval. This would prove to be St George's last ever match before they formed the joint venture with St George Illawarra. And on this occasion, St George went into the match winning at half time, but Canterbury come back in the second half to win 20 points to 12 and knock St George out of the 1998 final series. Of course, Canterbury went on that amazing run to the grand final where they lost to Brisbane. Then in 2001, the two clubs met each other in the first time that St George Illawarra had met Canterbury in a finals match. And it was in the 2001 qualifying final. And on this occasion, St George won a very thrilling match, 23 points to 22 at the Sydney Showground. So St George progressed to the preliminary final, whereas the quarter-final, whereas Canterbury had to go the hard way out, and they lost the next week. Then in 2015, so 14 years later, the two clubs met each other in the elimination final match at the Olympic Stadium. And on this occasion, Canterbury beat St George 11 points to 10 in golden point extra time, knocking St George out of the competition. Canterbury would end up reaching the second week of the finals, but it would have been a good feeling for Canterbury to get the wood over St George on that occasion. Then we go forward to round 26, 2017. So one of the more recent clashes between the two clubs, and going into the final match of the season, all St George had to do was win the match and they would qualify for the top 8. Canterbury had already been knocked out of the NRL's competition that year. They had no chance of making the finals, but they faced each other at the Olympic Stadium. And Canterbury upset St George, winning 26 points to 20, knocking St George out of the competition for that year, and therefore given North Queensland 8th place. As we all know, North Queensland ended up making the grand final from 8th place. So what might have been if St George would have got that 8th spot, we'll never know. Then we go forward to 2018. So once again, Canterbury didn't really have much to play for. St George were on course to make the finals. And on this occasion, Canterbury upset St George, winning 38 points to 0 at Canterbury Oval. And as a result, St George went from finishing 4th, where they should have finished if they beat Canterbury, to coming 7th, where they had to play against Brisbane in the opening week of the elimination finals. Of course, St George beat Brisbane comfortably, but once again, Canterbury thwarted St George's attempts as at a top 4 position. And then last year, the two clubs met each other in round 5 2019, and St George got their revenge on Canterbury from the year before, winning 40 points to 4 at Canterbury Oval. So after losing 38-0 at their home ground the year before, St George would have been really upset, wouldn't have been happy with that. And they come out and they took Canterbury to the cleaners. So in total, the head-to-head between the two clubs is 186 matches played. St George have won 99 matches overall. That's including St George and St George Illawarra. Canterbury's won 80 of those matches and there's been 7 draws. Now, one thing about the rivalry as well that makes it very competitive, not just from a being up the top and competing in the finals and all that keeper over the years. Another thing that makes it also very competitive off the field is the fact that, like Parramatta and Canterbury and eastern suburbs and south, the borders between Canterbury and St George in some places meet up with each other. So if you're not familiar with Sydney, you've got a suburb in the St George district called Kingsgrove. But if you jump in a car and you drive straight up the road, just follow that one road and go north, you're in Canterbury territory, you're in Campsie and suburbs like that. And then there's also another suburb in the St George district called Penshurst. And if you jump in your car and you just drive about 5 minutes in like a northwest direction, you're in Roselands. And Roselands and Clempton Park, that type of area, is Canterbury territory. So it's very close together. The two geographical locations, very, very close. And with both clubs being so successful and being up the top, especially in the 1970s, 80s, and in the early days, it's really given way to a great rivalry, very competitive. And hopefully in the future we get to see more big matches between these two clubs, because they bring in the crowds and they bring in the passion when both clubs are doing well. So that's me NRL Rivalries video for St George and Canterbury. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a like. If you really liked it, please give it a share. Share it with your friends and family. Did I get the rivalry right? Did I miss any games? Did I miss any big moments? Let me know in the comment section below. If you have a spare moment, go over to Rugby League History. That's my Facebook page. I'll put a link in the description below. And I've also started an Instagram page of Rugby League History. And I'll put a link next to the Facebook description. And as always, I just want to say a big thank you to all my subscribers and everyone that supported the channel and supported me. Thank you very, very much. You're very kind. And I look forward to putting out more content for y'all to enjoy. So as always, take care everyone. Catch yourselves all later. Ta-ra.